Great. Great. Because we're going to do a lot of, I'm going to show you a lot of what's on my screen. So you don't have to look at this. You can look at what I'm about to show you, which is much better.
We are recording.
And Michelle is on.
Yeah, Michelle, she's hiding too.
That's okay. You can hide. You can run. And you can hide. So welcome, everybody. Happy Cinco de Mayo. I hope everyone's got a margarita waiting after this is over with.
On a Taco Tuesday. Cinco de Mayo is on a Taco Tuesday, y'all.
Yep. It's the biggest wasted celebration in the history of the world, I think. But I'm going to drink my Gatorade until it's time for something stronger.
Yes, we're hydrating. Hydrating with
all due to a virus named Corona. Who knew?
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'll have this afternoon. I'm going to have a Corona. So today there's two things we really want to try to get to. So I'm going to move kind of fast. There's going to be, it's going to get a little in the weeds. If I get too much, please comment in the chat or just shout out, stop it, Jim. First half, I'm going to talk about the editing process. And the second half, we're going to talk about how you get your podcast published and through some of the steps. I did want to make one point today. I use Adobe's Audition software, Adobe Audition. I'm not going to teach how to use Audition today because I know a lot of you are going to end up not using this, and we talk about other options. So I'm going to talk about what I do, but not so much how I do it. If you guys think that there's a potential for a class on Adobe Audition editing, then maybe we'll do one separately. But just to be clear, this is not a how-to kind of thing. So let's start right off here with the software options that are available to podcasters. If you search podcasting software, you're going to come up with lists and lists and lists. And I'm going to, in our follow-up email that we send, I'm going to send you a link to a really good, what I think is a very good kind of review of the top 10 or 20 best podcast software, what they cost, ease of use, skill level. But in general, I'm going to list a few off here, but in general, keep in mind that as with video editing software and with photo editing software, the less complex it is, means it's easier to jump in and start using, but it's also, there's less control. And so, for example, if anybody's used iMovie and then jumped to something like Premiere or Final Cut, yes, it's a lot more complicated to use, but it also gives you a ton more control. So it's okay to start off with the free one, and when you reach a point where you can't do what you need to do, I think then it's the time to upgrade. So I wouldn't recommend going out and buying the Adobe Creative Suite right now, but you might get there one day. So the first one I'd like to mention is Audacity. It's free, it's very comprehensive, and it will take you through all the steps. So it's worth taking a look at that. And again, I'm going to send you the link to everything so you don't have to write all of these down. GarageBand is free if you are a Mac user. It comes with the computer. So GarageBand is installed on pretty much every Mac you can buy right now. So that's not a bad place to start. It'll help you with all the editing side, but unlike some of these others, it won't do the upload and post and fix your audio levels and stuff and broadcast it for you. It's just on board your Mac. So worth using for experimenting with the editing process, which I'll show you. There's one called Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout seems to be very comprehensive, including not just uploading the raw audio file and doing some tweaks to it, but also posting, publishing, getting it out to all the different sources. So it's kind of an all-in-one, and it's an online version, online software rather than an app that you download to your computer. Then it gets really into things like Logic Pro, which is a direct upgrade from GarageBand, and it allows you to import your old GarageBand video or audio files into Logic Pro. So it's a bit like Photoshop Lite, taking your files into Photoshop for real editing later. So those two work together, Logic Pro and GarageBand. Adobe Audition, which I use, can get a little expensive. It's a monthly fee, but it's really powerful. And most of the pros that I know use the Adobe suite, Premiere, Audition, Photoshop, things like that. So it's not going to run out of capabilities. it'll be there when you're ready for it. So it's worth thinking about for the future. And then there's one called Pro Tools, which is really the top end audio editing stuff. Expensive, difficult, but again, you can do anything you want with it. So some things to think about. So let's say you've chosen your software and you're ready to get started. You have done your first interview. I'm going to assume for the sake of argument today that you're going to be interviewing someone else. That may not be the case, in which case things are going to be simpler than what I described because you only have one track of audio to deal with. First thing I want to really stress is the need to stay organized. It's tempting to sort of throw your files onto the desktop and start crunching away at them. I implore you, if you're going to keep doing this for a while, try to be organized. And what I mean by that is I'm going to actually, if I can, I'm going to share my screen here, Delaina, there we go. And I want to show you this one here first. So let me know if you guys can see this little window here. This is where I keep my Quiet Place project. Can everybody see that okay? Give me a nod if it works. Okay, good. Because I have an audio visual podcast with my photography and my sound recordings, I have a little bit more to keep track of. All the pictures stay in this folder here. So each person that I've interviewed, I have the date and their photos are all inside there. Inside that are the originals. You may not have this much, right? Second part is the podcast itself. And I divide that up into some various different things. I keep my cover art in here so that I can always find it. Now, in general, if you sign up with a service, your podcast cover art should stay. It shouldn't go anywhere once you've set this up. I just keep it so I've got my layered file. So if I ever want to edit it, I can go back in and do it again. When you export your art, you're going to want to be 1024 square pixels is a good size for the little icon that shows up in iTunes and so forth. I use some music, so I saved the music file into its own folder so that later on, if I want to change the music, I have a place to keep that. Raw audio files. Here's my interviews. Each time I record an interview, it goes into this folder and I keep it and then I make a copy of it so that if I do any editing that's destructive and changes it somehow, I screw up the levels or I do something to it, I've always got the original to go back to. So I would always recommend making a copy of your interview before you start editing. Ambient sounds. If you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know that like right at the very end of it, because it's called Finding My Quiet Place, I thought it would be nice just to have a little Easter egg at the end of each episode. And I don't discuss it in the podcast, and it's just there. It's a little sound. And what I did was I went around my backyard and my neighborhood and just recorded things. I got crickets chirping, and I've got thunder in the distance, and I've got Beth cooking on the stove, and I've got, I don't know, cutting kale on a plate. Things that are just like happy little sounds. And I just took my recorder and recorded a few seconds of these things, put them into my folder here, and I just sort of try to tag one on the end of each episode as a kind of a, this is my little gift to you on the way out kind of thing. So if you listen all the way to the end, most episodes have that. And then finally, I've got what I call podcast parts, which is the other stuff that each episode needs, which is my intro, my outro, and then my sponsor by Delaina, which you're going to hear in just a minute. I use my sponsor area, since I don't have any paying sponsors, I use it to advertise one of my other projects. Sort of self-serving thing I do. But one day, maybe if it gets big enough, I'll have paid customers that can go in there. So the point of showing you this, and then there's sessions. Each separate Premiere session has its own folder, and I'll kind of run over how that happens. But this way, if I ever need to go back and edit a podcast, all the pieces that make up that podcast are self-contained here, and we don't have bits and pieces all over the place. This is what's called digital asset management, or DAM. And this is something that we've been using in the visual side for 15 years since Macbeth started, keeping everything organized, labeling everything, including dates on everything. And if you do more and more of this, and if you start one podcast and then a second podcast, you're really going to want to stay organized. So that's my advice for you there. Before you start audit, let me pop over to my my edit page here. So I need to stop sharing. And then you have to teach me how to jump from screen to screen, Delaina. I want to get this on screen for you and make sure it works. This is my Adobe Audition screen here, which is a little overwhelming at first glance, but I'm going to break it up into bite-sized chunks here.
It looks like you're going to launch a shuttle.
Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming. It's like the first time you go into Photoshop and all those windows and toolbars and everything pop up. It gets a bit overwhelming. And I'm not going to concentrate, as I say, on the details of how to use Premiere so much as the methods I use for going through the process. And I think this will be universal across all the platforms. But I do want to say a couple of notes real quick. The goal of all of this editing stuff is just to make yourself and your guest sound as good as possible. Remove the ums and the moments of silence, repetition, weird little sounds we all make, which I'm going to play a bit for you and you'll hear it. You don't need to necessarily fix it. You can see how many edits there are in this 30-minute thing. So I go in and I'm pretty ruthless about chopping out the stuff that doesn't sound so good. But you don't necessarily have to do that, especially if you're very good on a microphone and you don't and you don't touch and you don't do weird things. So this could be a very short process for you. Certain things, if you're going to edit, I want you to think about setting your levels correctly first. And I wonder if I should talk about that first. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, let me do that real quick. So when you bring in, let me show you one thing that is important for me to demonstrate to you. When I bring in I'm going to bring in my newest, I'm going to bring in my newest interview that I haven't even opened. All it is copied. So this is Melissa Wiggins here. You know her, right, Delaina?
She is a dear, dear friend. If you guys do not follow her, she is quite an amazing human being.
Yep. And this is, you remember my system that I showed you last week? I have the Zoom H4n with 2 microphones going into it. So those two tracks there are, one is me and one is Melissa. And if you know Melissa.
All right, I'm ready.
Let me see.
He is Scottish, by the way. We're going to give him that warning.
I
She's
do this
Scottish.
intro twice, and you'll see why when you hear the article. So
here, let's jump to here.
In the know that don't watch any British shows, solicitor is a lawyer, correct? And I know.
This boy, you married him.
I did. I married him. He's a very nice.
This is what you see when you first bring the podcast in, and you notice it's obvious from the visuals that Melissa has got a loud voice and she had the mic very close to her mouth. So she's very loud and I'm very quiet. What we don't want to do right now, they're on left and right tracks. They're a mono signal on left and right. What we don't want is to leave it that way, because then Melissa would be all in your left ear and I'd be all in your right ear, and it would be really distracting and awkward. And also you can see the difference in the sound levels. So the first thing I do is I mix these two together. So let me see, convert sample type. I'm going to do this very fast just to give you guys an idea of how it works. So I'm going to turn it into mono, and I have a left and right mix. I don't know if that's too small for you guys to see, but I can say, I know that the top track here is the left channel and the bottom track is the right channel. So I'm going to experiment a couple of times here, but it looks like we need to mix this so that we balance ourselves out. So I'm going to go to about a 40-60 split left and right. So what that will do when I hit OK is it's going to blend those two signals together. This is kind of a long track, but we talk forever. This is almost an hour long and I have to edit it down to 30 minutes. So it's going to be a process. We're not going to do that today. Coming up here very quickly, we'll show you what's happening. So now this is an audio, a single mono audio file. So
of the kids, they are actually stage 4.
Levels are a bit low
and
at this point,
in Cannon's case, with his type of pediatric cancer,
now,
we were told
Melissa's voice and my voice are all blended into one track. I brought hers down a bit and mine up a bit to try to even them out a bit. We don't want to leave it as mono though, because with a final export, it's going to be a stereo recording. So what we'll do then is turn it back again into stereo tracks. So it's equal in both ears. And this time we're splitting a mono signal so we can leave them at 100% each. It spins around, creates now a stereo track that's balanced. So now you have the same thing in both ears. Does that make sense? So now when you listen to your headphones, you get an equal signal. It doesn't sound like you're being pulled left and right. So that is all done in the waveform part of Audition. And then there's when you go to the multi-track, this right here is what we started with. This means that's my interview level, which I brought in. This is Cole Neesmith talking. And then what I'm going to do here is zoom in so you guys can see what's going on. Oops. I'm going to zoom in. There we go. So here's when we talk about bringing the pieces together and being organized in that folder. What I do, the very first step I do is take my my last week's episode and I just do a save as. And I'm going to do this real quick. I'm just going to call this Melissa. This won't be the final one, so we'll just leave it. Let's put it. We don't want to save it in the Melissa folder, so we'll go to sessions and we'll say new folder, Melissa. Create and save. Okay, so now we've got that. So now the Melissa session is going to go into the Melissa folder. It puts all the pieces in there. And now what I can delete the Cole Neesmith part of this if I wanted to and drop in. Oh, it has to do its thing. Sorry about that. Well, while that's happening, let me give you a little idea of what the next steps are going to be. And I might just kill this if it's going to take too long. And it looks like it is, so we'll go boink. So anyway, that's saved. So now whatever I do to this is going to be, is not going to affect the Cole one. So here's what these pieces are. The top track, this is the way I do it. You can do whatever you want. This top track, the green one, is the interview process. Now that it's been split from 2 separate audio signals into one mono and then re-separated as stereo, now it's ready to drop into my track here. This is what I did with Cole. And when I do my interview, I do a little intro part, and then I do my commercial, and then I do the rest of it. So if it's all right, I'm going to play this first 1 minute for you, just so you can hear the format, and you can watch what's going on up here on the screen. Okay, or too loud? Turn it down. Okay.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Finding My Quiet Place. And today, I have
that top track is me talking.
Cole Neesmith. Good morning, Cole. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
Thanks for being with me today.
Of course. Honored.
The music comes up a little bit, goes back down.
This episode is sponsored by
There's
Legacy
hero,
Life
Delaina.
Project, creating personal biographies of elderly relatives in high-definition video
Yellow.
so that future generations will be able to see and hear their life stories in their own words. Create a lasting legacy for your family before it's too
Pardon
late.
the shameless plug.
Visit legacylifeproject.com for details and to schedule a personal biography video interview.
Music comes back up a little bit, and then we go right back into the interview.
And we're back, and I'm with Cole Neesmith this morning. Cole, how are you today?
I'm doing really great.
By the way,
it's a great Saturday.
It is a.
By the way, this morning, I think I'd been out drinking the night before because I sound like a 6-pack-a-day smoker in the first part of this interview, I think. Maybe I wasn't awake. It was about 7 a.m. at the YMCA, so. Anyway.
I like how even though you're talking, you're bringing that music down. You didn't just bring it down.
Right.
Gradually, as you're talking, bring that down. I really like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The term for what happens here, if you look at this little dotted line, it shows the music coming down while there's talking. It's called ducking. So if you're looking at your software and you're not quite sure how to make the music go behind the people talking and drop, it's called ducking. And look, this Audition has this ability to do auto ducking, which every time it senses another track that's determined to be speaking, it will drop the music down to a predetermined level. So it's actually handling that for me. So if I start moving pieces around, the duck part will move with it. So that's very nice. Otherwise, you have to manually move those. I want to show you quickly kind of process I go through when I'm editing. I'm just going to do one example so that you can just see it real fast. So I'm going to zoom way in here, and we're going to listen to this little first intro piece just right here.
Neesmith this morning.
I need to turn it up
Cole,
just a little.
how are you today?
I'm doing really great. It's a great Saturday.
It is a great Saturday. And before we get into kind of, what you do here, tell us a little bit about where we're...
Oh, I'm so bad. I hate my own voice. All right, so I'm going to show you real quick what I do here. So I'd go back to...
Saturday.
It is a great Saturday. And
okay, I don't need to agree with them that it's a great Saturday. We can stop just before that, I think. So we're going to go and see where we can cut that out. So
it is a great Saturday. And before we get into kind of, what you do here, tell us a little...
So bad. I'm going to zoom in even further here so you can see this. So this is where I say tell.
Tell us a little bit.
That little zigzag right there is the T of tell. So you'll start to recognize the shapes if you do this enough. Oh, before I start, no, I'd done this already. I'm going to bring the Melissa one in if there's time and show you one more thing. So we're going to edit this. So I take my little razor blade up here at the top, and I'm going to cut it right between those two words right there. I'm going to go back to where I start this rambling nonsense, right after he says it's a great Saturday.
I'm doing really great. It's a great Saturday.
It is.
So he says it's a great Saturday, and then I'm going to say, tell me, because it makes it sound like I was all set and ready to go with my next thing. So I'm going to take that piece, I'm going to shift delete, and it slides everything over. All the other cuts after this will now shift over in one chunk. So now it sounds like...
Really great. It's a great Saturday.
Tell us a little bit about where we're recording today.
So I took out all the ums and the tuts and all the stuff while I was getting my thoughts together. And now I sound like I was prepared, and we keep the things moving along and the audience doesn't get bored. And this really, in my opinion, you have to think about what your audience experience is for this process. And so what we did right there, I do over and over and over again, as you can see from my, here, I'll zoom out a bit, and you can see how many times during there we go. You can start to see the cuts happening here. So there's a bunch of them. So it probably, I think what I've figured out is it takes me 4 times as long as the final piece to edit it. So a 30-minute takes 2 hours of editing. That's become my format. Now, the first ones took me longer because I didn't really know what I was doing, and I've learned a lot of keyboard shortcuts and other things to speed this process up. So there's one piece that I should have mentioned before this, which I'm going to make sure I'm saved as Melissa here. This session didn't record, so I'm not going to save the changes I make right here. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go back to full view. I'm going to take this whole interview track out. So now it's ready for the next session, which is Melissa here. And I want to show you what happens when I bring Melissa into this track and drop her down there. For one thing, this interview is almost twice too long. We almost talked for an hour, and I try to end right here at about the 30-minute mark. Well, that's 25. Cole's was shorter than usual, but before you start chopping and cutting, let me make one real strong recommendation. Set your audio levels on the whole track first. The reason I say that is if you get halfway through cutting this up and you realize you need to change your audio levels, you now have lots of little audio sections, and you want to make it all in one. So there's a couple of important things that I would recommend you do. First of all, notice when we
You're welcome,
start to play this,
It's spotless.
I'm going to turn the volume way down so that I can talk over it here, because it's not really important what she's saying. You see the levels on the side of this? Let me see if I can show you. Can you guys see my cursor, by the way? Can you see my cursor on here? Okay. So this level meter down the right-hand side of my screen shows the peaks of what she's saying. And it looks like right here she laughs or something. So there's a nice large one there. So this this 0 at the very top is maxed out. If your levels go beyond 0, you have started to distort. What Lawrence was talking about last week is that distortion happening. But if you're not loud enough, you're going to find that your the person listening to your audio is going to have to be turning it up. So what I've discovered is that there's a thing called, let me see if I can find it here, matching clip loudness. Does that little window pop up on there? Can you guys see that? Okay, good. I'm never sure what you can actually see here, so I want to be sure. I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail, but Apple has provided these guidelines, and I will provide them to you in a link. You want your target loudness to be -16 LUFS, which is loudness units full scale or something like that. Don't worry about what it means. Just know that you want your audio to be set for what Apple is looking for. And your very first podcast that you submit to them is going to get checked to make sure that it meets their criteria, or they'll kick it back and say, fix it. So this might take a minute here. Yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the average loudness of the whole clip before we even get started in editing and making sure that it meets the criteria from the beginning. And also I do that with all the other ones. If I bring in a new piece of music, I do that. The Delaina sponsorship thing, I do that to it as well, because you not only want to be, you don't want your audio the same from one podcast to the next, but you want everything internally to be the same, right? You don't want your intro music to be really loud and the person turns the volume down, and then when you come in, you're real quiet and they turn it up. So this helps us. So now that same piece of audio, you'll notice, is much closer to the primary area, which is about a -6 to a -12 is the ideal spot to be. So that's we know now that our talking, our audio matches what Apple wants us to make. So, and these settings can be adjusted, and some of the more automatic ones like Buzzsprout, you'll just upload your audio and it'll be run through their filters and fixed for you. So it's possible you'll never have to deal with this. I just wanted you to be aware that it's a thing to know about. And I'm going to send you some links to much more details about this. Things like bit rate, things like sample rate, those sorts of technical things, they have specifics. But what I've found is you set your software up one time for exporting it the correct way, and then from that point on, it'll stay set that way. So it's kind of a set it and forget it thing. In fact, I had to go back and relearn all this stuff because it's been a year since I set these. So I had to go figure out what was it I did in the first place. So bless you, Dave. That looked like a sneeze. I can't hear it, but it looked like one. Okay. So then now that I've set my audio levels, and I already know that my music and my sponsorships are done because I just did a save as. So then I would begin going in, listening to this and chopping it up the way I showed you. And you have to listen to the whole thing and take the pieces out that are annoying or repetitive or whatever. So in a nutshell, your audio editing software gets everything, if you do it right, gets everything ready to go so that when you're ready to publish, you have an existing file. The one last thing I'll show you, and I won't do a full export, but when I go into this software and I say, export multi-track mix down entire session, there's some things in here that what I was just talking about that you'll need to set to make sure that they're set the right way. So MP3 is the format, 44.1 kilohertz is the correct sample type, 192 kilobits per second, constant bit rate is what CBR stands for. All these technical bits are listed in the stuff we'll send you to make sure that your final mix down matches what Apple and the rest of the podcasters need. So maybe save you a little bit of research in figuring this out. Again, if you use one of the all-in-one type softwares like the Audacity or Buzzsprout, they'll probably handle all this stuff for you, and you can forget I said anything.
And Jim, when you talk about 100 hertz, I literally, I don't know if I'm the only one here, but I literally think the Back to the Future thing. What does he say about the gigawatts?
Oh yeah.
He freaks out about the gigawatts and the flux capacitor and the plutonium.
It's a bit like that. Yeah.
That's immediately, am I the only one that thinks that when he's like 1.21 gigawatts? Like,
Well,
I'm the only dork. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Sure.
It's probably too technical for most people, and I welcome you to forget this instantly now that I've told you. Just knowing that it's there will help you at some point, I promise. You'll be some warning box will pop up and say, have you met these requirements for your bit rate? And you'll be like, oh, that was that thing Jim talked about. And then you go look it up in the link I send you and you'll know. So.
And they're going to be like, where's the gigawatts? Because Delaina talks about gigawatts.
That's the question. Where are the gigawatts?
Right.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing for a second here because I think we're done with that guy for now. And then I'm going to talk to a little bit. Oh, look, we got some more people. There's Beth too. Couple of other points. When you're in these kinds of software, try to do as little destructive editing as possible. Oops, I'm gonna see what the chat is. Thanks, Michelle. Try to do non-destructive editing. And what I mean by that is, just like in Photoshop, use layers when you can. And in this software, try to do things that don't affect the original files if you can help it. That way you can always go back again. I like to have as many sort of escape hatches as possible, and I don't want to have to go back to the original piece of recording and start all over from the beginning. So if there's things you can undo, or if there's ways in your particular software to be non-destructive, which means you could just take away a filter you applied and it goes back to the way it was, try to do that. And if I teach a class on how to use Audition, I'll go in much more depth about how I do that on this one. Start with the end in mind. We talked about this during the interview process. If you're going for a 30-minute podcast, don't record 2 hours of audio like I did right here. Save yourself some time in the back end. A little bit about music. If you upload a podcast with copyrighted music in it, Apple and the rest of them will shut you down. They'll either reject it or they'll put a little warning note on it saying audio has been suppressed in this file or something. So I wouldn't even try it. There are so many royalty-free music sites. And if you're going to use the same intro and outro music for every episode like I do, then you only need to buy it once. And buying it can be $3 or $10 or maybe $20 max. And that's your theme music forever. You buy the rights to it, you tell them what you're going to use it for, and you make a one-time purchase, and you now own the rights to that music. And you can publish it everywhere you want to, and you don't have to worry about it. So don't risk it by grabbing a track from a pop song, because it's just going to mean you'll have to re-record it all again later. Advertising. There's a couple of ways to get ads into your podcast. And as a starting out company, it's really not a realistic thing unless you have a family business that you want to market inside your podcast. I think when you get up to 1,000 subscribers or 1,000 downloads monthly or some formula like that, you'll start to get people asking if they can be on your podcast or what are your ad rates. And sometimes they will be sent to you, like I'll send you a 30-second clip and you add it right into your mix as you're building it. And other times, it's similar to the way YouTube works. You just grant them permission to put a little bit at the beginning or the end, and then you don't know what ads are going to get put in there. But that's a problem for when you get lots and lots and lots of subscribers. So first thing you want to do is build up your listenership. And we're going to talk more about marketing and stuff next week with Delaina. So the next step, let's say you've edited this thing, it sounds absolutely perfect. You've checked your LUFS and your bit rates, and you've exported your file, and it's perfect. You listen back to the MP3 you just exported, and it sounds amazing. Next step is, okay, what do I do next? How do I get it out there in the world? Think of a publisher or a hosting company for your podcast as the storage place for it. Spotify and Apple iTunes and Stitcher and all of these other places are directories. They don't actually store your files, right? Think of them as like a listing. If I go to Stitcher and I say, find me a podcast about cats, and it lists all the cat podcasts. And I click on one and I say, I want to listen to that one. Stitcher's not actually doing the download. The company that hosts your podcast is actually streaming that out. And that's what you're paying for when you subscribe to their service. You're paying for them to stream that out for you. Apple Podcasts and the rest of them are just directories. So the heavy lifting is done by the host, not by the directory. So again, Buzzsprout is one that will not just help you edit your podcast, but also will host it as well. There's a bunch of them, and I'm going to include a link that has top 10 or 20 podcast host companies. And then I'm going to show you mine, because the one I use, I'm just used to it. So I can show you what the process looks like when I upload. And whether you want to use mine, which is called Libsyn, which is short for Liberated Syndicator or Syndication. So now I'm going to share one more time here and show you a little bit about what that process looks like.
That sounds pretty, Jim, when you say that.
There it is. Share sound. Okay. So there we go. Can you guys all see that okay? Yes, good. So this is the Libsyn dashboard. It looks very 1980s. It's not very flashy and sexy, and that's fine for what it does, because the general public never sees this, right? I go in and I upload my stuff to it, and it handles the distribution to all of those other resources. And I'll show you kind of how that happens. Quick aside, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'm going to include the link in this afternoon's newsletter. Podcasting Quick Start webinar, hosted by Libsyn. It's absolutely free. It's tomorrow night at 6 p.m., May the 6th at 6. And it sounds like a very interesting little, in addition to what we're doing here, this is going to be another quick start. I would recommend, if you have the time and you're around tomorrow, I'll be tuning into this to see what they have to say. So May the 6th at 6 p.m. tomorrow. I'll include a link to this in the follow-up email today. Okay, so what I do is I go to my content section, and it shows me all of my previous episodes where I've uploaded them, all the way back to episode number 1. So the last one was Cole. So previously published content, scheduled waiting release, and drafts. What I'm going to do, if I go to add new content, I'll show you kind of what that looks like. New episode. So I get some choices here. I upload my media file, which is that MP3 that I just finished exporting. Oops, sorry. So I click add and I throw that in here. If I have any extra bonus content for this episode, I can link those here. Those will become links in the final distribution. Once I've uploaded my file, I go to details, and this is the part where you get to put in all your descriptions. Title of the episode, a subtitle if you want to give it some more, a nice long explanation of who it is I talked to and what's interesting, and some teaser stuff.
Can I tease a little bit of the marketing real quick on the description?
Yep.
So last year, Google released that it uses SEO to help podcasts be searchable and found under search, which is search, the whole search engine thing. So the good news about that is, for you can use long tail keywords and short tail keywords, and that's a whole nother digital marketing thing. But basically it's things like, whatever your topic is, just little key, like 3 keywords, that would be, you can use that as a long tail keyword, or short words that would be in your SEO. And SEO, if you're not familiar with that, is that search engine optimization, and it's what Google uses to help your content be found, whatever the content is. So with that, in your description, think of those things. And when I say search for them, long tail and short tail keywords, the easiest way to find descriptions for what your topic is that you want to be found under is you can Google, like, let's say it's a chocolate chip cookie recipe. You Google chocolate chip, and as soon as you start to see all of that drop down, those are long tail and short tail keywords that you could use in your descriptions. So that's can be very important when it comes to your podcast being found. The second part of that, though, I do want to let you know that everything Jim is telling you, a clear sound quality podcast with the your cover art, and excuse my children for arguing in the background. So they are really awesome if you can hear that. It's great sound quality. So with that, I do want to say that your podcast, all of the things that Jim's teaching you should be first and foremost. The description, don't go too heavy on that. Don't go too heavy on title, like on metadata and all that stuff if you're familiar with it. But do think about that when you're writing your description. Think about some of those keywords that you want to be found under. So that was just a marketing precursor.
Good. We're going to talk about it in depth next week too, about that. And just as an aside, you guys, Apple has its own requirements. So when you're done with your description for everyone else, like Stitcher and the rest, down here you'll notice Apple Podcast. They don't want your episode name. All they want is the title. They don't want episode number or anything, because they're going to get that down here. Season 1, episode, whatever. So they're very strict about the way that they like their stuff done, which is typical Apple, as you would know. So, and your summary has to be shorter, or doesn't have to be shorter, but it has a much lower limit on the words that Apple allows than in general. So what I usually do is a full description here, and then just pull a couple of paragraphs for the Apple one. Then you go to the artwork, and you need a thumbnail and a widescreen image. So these are, one is square and one is a horizontal. And because I do photography, and in addition to my podcast, I always have some images to use. And remember, these are episode level artwork. Your artwork for your podcast remains the same all the time. So when it shows up in Apple, it'll have the same one. But when they go to the episode information, there'll be different artwork for that. So you can snap a quick photo of the person you're interviewing, or whatever you feel is appropriate for that. Then under social, you can write separate statuses for LinkedIn and Facebook. I tend to leave these just as they are. I don't put anything here, and I just let the, if these fields are left blank, the default will be used. So I don't usually change it for those two. And then finally, under scheduling, when I say I'm going to set up a release date, this allows me to say I finish on a Thursday afternoon. I launch on Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. as my time. I figure that's when people are looking for a nice, quiet place podcast. So I chose Saturday mornings. You can do it whenever you want, or you can go live the minute you're done. You can just hit publish right now. I've just tried to be consistent on when. You can also make it expire. I'm not sure why you would do that, but I leave mine to be out there forever. You can release in different places at different times if you choose to. I just let it all go at the same time. One thing I want to show you here, in addition to that, and then once you've selected the time you want it to go, you just hit publish right there, and at that appropriate time, it will go live everywhere and all the different platforms at the same time. So pretty plug and play. I know it's not sexy to look at, but it seems to do the job. So I'm pretty happy with the way it works. We talked about destinations. This allows you to pick all the different places you want to be. As you can see, there's lots of options. You can add others, I believe, in addition to these. Yeah, add new destinations. So if it's not listed here, you can go find where it is. Somebody said PodBeam wasn't one of the places I put mine, which is true, apparently. So clearly I need to add that.
Jim, can I ask you a question while we're on that area real quick?
Yeah.
I started to type it out, and it's just way too wordy.
Go ahead.
So I release music for my daughter, and so it takes sometimes 2 weeks before it's published because they're verifying specific things. iTunes takes longer, but they don't do that for podcasts?
As I said, if you put copyrighted music in it, it'll probably get flagged and taken down. But it's been my experience every time I've said go live at Saturday at 6 a.m., even if I'm doing it late on a Friday night, the next morning at 6 a.m., it's live everywhere. Like it's on the minute. There's no delay at all. So I think they're probably prepping it in the background or something because it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got, every publisher or host that you use is going to have some sort of stats. This tells me how many times each episode has been downloaded in total by the month. There's lots of other ways of breaking down the data. because I'm only doing this for fun and I'm not looking to make any money off of it, I don't really check my stats very often. But if this is a thing that you're doing either to make money or to support another part of your business that is a moneymaker, then you probably want to get into this. And next week, Delaina and I are going to talk much more about how to promote and also how to read your analytics in a way that helps you understand a little bit more about how it's being used. I know that was a real quick summary, but does anybody have any questions about how Libsyn works or hosting in general? Hearing none. All right, I'm going to go back here. The only other things that would be tips I would really recommend is, and it took me a while to figure this one out, while you're in the editing process, you're listening very intently to your person speaking, right? You may have listened to them, and it might be a month since you did the recording by the time you get around to editing it. So it's a chance to really listen closely and get a refresh on what they say. Take good notes while you're doing that. It'll make writing the description so much easier when you get done with it. So as I'm listening, whenever, like with Cole, he said some really cool things. I was like, oh, that's a great quote. I'm going to pull that quote out, because then when I post in Facebook or in LinkedIn or in Instagram or in wherever and say, hey, listen to my podcast, I can pull one of his quotes out that I've written down. I usually have a text editor up at the same time I'm audio editing, so I can jot down notes about things like that. So otherwise, you're going to have to go, what was that thing you said again? And now you're going to have to listen back to the whole podcast. So try to do it while you're recording.
I love that, Jim. I didn't think to do that. On top of that, too.
Artwork.
Oh, Jim.
As I say, I shoot the pictures. Yeah, Delaina.
Oh, sorry. I was like, can he hear me?
I can't hear your audio.
You can't hear? Hold on. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. So I was going to say, with the marketing piece there, when you're writing down, so if you're, instead of, just posting, because Jim also has that visual aspect of it when it comes to Instagram, he has the visual part of it. So when you want to spread that, and you're, this is a smaller part of your business, and you're spreading that, and again, we'll get into this next week. Think of too about content with that. So you can create graphics with like the Cole News quote on it, and that goes on Instagram, and then something goes on LinkedIn. And so there's different ways that you can take this one piece of content. It's if you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, he does this very, very well. He takes one piece of content, he can make 20 pieces of content out of one. And that's kind of what that is. So anything that you can write down, or keywords, or anything, quotes, anything like that, those are definitely going to help you with not just posting the podcast, but posting it and then linking back to your podcast and building those numbers up and the analytics that we'll talk about.
And what I also do is provide my interviewee with some very easy ways to help me promote it to that person's circle, because everybody wants their friends to hear them talk, right? So with Cole, I gave him the photos, I gave him blurbs, I gave him the links, and I said, here's all your stuff, Cole. And he went nuts and helped me promote that episode. So it's sort of common sense kind of stuff there, but yeah, that's a nutshell of how we edit it and then how we publish it. What'd you think? Ernie, you have a question, I can tell.
No, I was just going to compliment you on a great session. That's a lot there, especially with the technology stuff. But seems like, thankfully, most of it is relatively intuitive in terms of like either the software will take care of it for you, or because you've not made it too complicated, it's just a couple of voices or a couple inputs, and you just take it from there. But that's great. So thank you. Very helpful.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
You do have a question, Jim.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So when we're using, because I use, I have a subscription to Premium Beat for music. And I've run into this with clients as well. Other companies that are making videos or anything like that, they use software. And when they do use the software, there's a button that you can click to say, that I've purchased this. So, and it tells, it tells Facebook or it tells whatever that, hey, we bought this, we can use it. Because I know Facebook's really can be really a pain in the butt about that. Is there something, because I don't know anything about that when it comes to podcast music. So if I purchase this and I've purchased this thing and it's not, I've bought the copyright to it. Does it feel that? Does it read that when you just use that music?
It, to my understanding, I don't know what the technology is in the background that's making that happen, but whenever we've done it for videos we've made, or audios, whether it's SoundCloud or Audio Jungle or any of these subscription services, they will give you a free sample, but it'll be watermarked, if you will. So there's that little background voice saying the name of it all the time.
Premium beat every like 3 seconds. Yeah.
Audio Jungle.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you buy it, that's been taken out, right? Then you get a clean copy of it. So there must be something that they put in there, some kind of subsonic code or something that's saying this has been paid for by this person. I'm not quite sure what their tech is, but it's never been flagged. Right. Okay. But if I use I used a Def Leppard song once for a piece and I put it on YouTube and it was down instantly.
Yeah.
Instantly. I don't know how they're scrubbing it, but they seem to be able to tell the difference between paid and unpaid, and they nail it. So yeah, don't take a chance. $5-10 is worth it.
So Jim, for those of us that may or may not be on the call that have the perfectionist gene, don't want to mention any names. As you continue to go through this process, we had an expression in the government when you would be editing and moving stuff around, and I would turn around and I'd go to a colleague and said, okay, you've just gone from happy to glad. This is going. We're launching it. In other words, the more you do this, you're trying to get a feel. Are there some times that you go, I don't have it exactly. I realize that you control when you release it, but having said that, if you don't have a deadline, is there some point the more you do this where you just go, you know what? I'm probably not going to win the Pulitzer for this, but in reality, the information is more important. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? Yeah. It's, I mean, I think this is like any artistic endeavor. You have to just decide when it's done, because it'll never be done. You know, it's never going to say to you, I'm finished, you know, like a painting or anything else. I think what I do is I listen, obviously, when I'm recording it. And then as I'm going through it, I'm chopping it up. So I'm not really listening to it flow. I'm listening to tiny bits at a time and slotting them all together. But then I'll export the file, and usually I'll listen to the whole thing all the way through as a single file, MP3 with music and the words. And I'll often catch a mistake or something. And then I have to decide, is that bad enough to go back, re-edit that and re-export the whole thing, or is it good enough? And, you know, I've gone both ways on that. Yeah, I mean, that answers my question. Whenever I've done editing, I tend to go through something at least 3 times. The first time I'm catching the obvious junk. Yep. The second time I want to make sure the audience is going to be receiving what we're trying to say. And then the final one is when everything's all together in the bell of the whistle. That's what I thought. But I could just see me with several bourbons late into the night going, I don't think this is what it sounds that way. Yeah, and I'll tell you, I've found myself down that rabbit hole of trying to get every last and little noises I make. And finally, I'm just like, fine, it's good enough. I got rid of the bad ones, but there's a few that, or I'll talk over the other person, and it's probably possible to fix that, but it goes by so fast. I'm the only one that's ever going to hear it. So again, think about your audience. They're on their headphones, they're jogging, they're driving in their car with background noise, kids fighting in the background, whatever. For example. So you're going to, you have to remember your audience is not sitting in a Dolby 7.1 surround room, absolutely silent, hanging on your every word. This is not cinema, right? There's lawnmowers in the background and stuff in our daily lives. We're just not, it doesn't have to be that good. So I would say you could obsess to the point that you never get anything done. Yeah, and I realize, for those of us that have done some Facebook Live stuff in the past or just record that and put it on YouTube, actually there seems to be more interest if it's not 100% perfect, that there seems to be a reality piece to it, that if it looks like it was a studio cut. So. Agreed. And that brings me to another point. I said take out the gaps and the pauses and stuff. There have been times when I've made the choice to leave a pause in. I've asked a question and the person has paused for sort of like 3 seconds and then said, I never thought about that. And the pause is part of the process. If they said that the minute my question came out of my mouth, it would sound somehow artificial, because it would be. So not every time there's a slight gap do I
you know, smash it all together. So again, it's an artistic endeavor. There is no right or wrong here. It's just kind of what do you feel sounds best. So.
And it's that thing where you stare at a word too long. Like
Yeah.
look at the word, like,
yeah.
What was the word? I just, I don't even know. It doesn't, you know, you look at a word too wrong. It's like, God, does that spell right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think it's
Step
that
away for a
look at
bit
it too long and you're gonna, you know.
Yeah.
So Rhonda just said, yes, I totally agree. I think there is value in coming across as real, done well, but not perfect.
Right. Right. And if I screw up, I might let it go. But if my client says or does something and sounds a bit goofy, I'll either chop the whole chunk out or I'll do my best to make it sound like a very smooth transition, because I always want people to be proud of the way they sound. So they help me promote this thing, right? It's you know, if you make them sound dumb, they're not going to tell anyone about it. So
thank you.
You know, entertain your audience, give them some value. And then, you know, when it's time to go, you shut up and quit talking. So I just want to make sure that what we covered here made sense. And again, as with previous ones, we will give you all the links and all the notes so that you have them to refer back to. And I'm going to link you to stuff that goes into much more depth about some of the things that I only touched on, in case you want to nerd out and get into sample rates and, you know, kilobits per second and things. And thank you again to those of you who have filled out the survey. We'll include one for episode 3. And again, this really helps. I don't know if we'll ever do this again, but I feel like it helps me get better from one episode to the next, like my little lav mic here. So thank you all for being here. If you have any other questions, you can always email me or Delaina, and look for that follow-up a little bit later this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for all your time and all your work.
It's my pleasure. I really enjoy this.
Yes. Thank you, guys.